Oh, okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I feel very honored and delighted to be here in Norway again. Richard Stallman does not like today's open source because he considers it a dumb down and a betrayal of first principles. Alan Kay does not like today's object-oriented programming because he considers it a dumb down and a betrayal of first principles. And I don't like the World Wide Web because I consider it a dumb down and a betrayal of first principles. And it has come to be a fountain of appearance, of white space, of fonts, with very little concern for content the way I think of it. But we'll get to that. So let's see. Am I up? That doesn't look black. Okay. All right. So that's my autobiography, and a lot of what I'm going to say is covered in that. What I'm concerned about is what you can't see and what today's software does not do. Everything today is in the same paradigm. Windows, Macintosh, Linux, the paradigm of hierarchy and unconnectable windows. People ought to have the choice of another paradigm, and that's what I'm still working on. I'm still trying to build an alternative computer world without hierarchy and with visible bridges between the contents of pages. Right now, you cannot show a visible bridge between the contents of one window and the contents of another in the windowing systems, and you cannot show a visible bridge between the contents of one web page and another web page. Why not? Because they're imitating paper. In an era of electronic documents, why are we imitating paper? You can't learn to swim if you hold onto the side of the pool. Imitating paper is holding onto the side of the pool. True electronic documents will have visible connections between their contents. And right now, you see, Adobe made all these deals with the font people. And so they've convinced people that pretty fonts are what computers are about. Okay. But before I get your combative juices going, let's talk about a subject we all love. Norway. There are many prominent Norwegian Americans in computerdom. I think of Mark Andreessen. Well, Mark Andreessen, I asked him, do you pronounce your name Andreessen? He said, no, I'm from the Midwest. We do things simply there. I say Andreessen. And it was that simplicity that he put into the Mosaic browser, which is what made the web take off over all the other hypertext systems that were already on the web, such as the ones created by Neil Larson. It's funny how the myth of the World Wide Web as having sprung out of the brow of God has taken over. There were so many hypertext systems before the World Wide Web, some of them actually on the Internet. Okay, other Norwegian Americans. Douglas Engelbart, we'll come back to him. Ken Iverson of the APL language. Håkon Lie of cascading style sheets. Kristen Nygaard, we'll talk about him. So when I was little, I thought I was Norwegian. My parents were, I lived in Chicago with my grandparents, and there were Norwegian flags all over the house. And my grandfather read Nordmanns Forbundet, which was propaganda magazine, a magazine for, to keep alive the spirit of occupied Norway. The Nazis were here, for God's sake. And so my parents were young actors who were divorced as soon as I was born, so I got left with my mother's parents. So my mother went on to a very successful career as an actress, and my father went on to a very successful career as a movie director. He did Lilies of the Field and Requiem for a Heavyweight. But the man who raised me was Theodore Holm. I'm Theodore Holm Nelson. And Theodore Holm was born at what is now the Hågamla Prestegård in Hå, outside, south of Stavanger. And we're going there this weekend. So he was a Viking. He was born on the shore. And at that time, there was a word Sokning, and he would sing a little song about Soknings, the inland people, making fun of them. Sokning, da-da-da-da-da, but I can't sing it. I don't know it, and nobody knows what a Sokning is anymore, so there we are. That's culture change for you. So, Pop was born in the 1880s, and his father was the parish priest, Karenos Theodore Holm. And the place he grew up is now an art center. It was, for a time, it was a drug rehabilitation center. And he had 10 brothers and sisters. So they brought me here in 1949, when I was a little kid, for a big wedding with 140 Holmes and Holm affines sitting at the table at that time. So at that time, I had many relatives from the Holm branch, now probably 1,000 cousins from those 10 brothers and sisters. And they took me after the show, or another night we were here, but it was right about this time, they took me to see Oklahoma performed here in Oslo, but it was performed in Landsmal, which is now called, of course, Nynorsk. Now, at that time, it was so charming to put on Oklahoma in Landsmal because, of course, it was a play about the common people of the country, and Landsmal was being built out of the language, of the dialects of the common people of the country. And who was the principal opponent of Landsmal? Well, I later found out it was Gerhard Holm, my grandfather's brother. I think this is a picture of Gerhard Holm. And he was the one who was the most against it. Well, of course, the controversy still goes on. But it's fascinating to have a bilingual country of this kind. So anyway, on that trip, I met a fellow, an extremely interesting guy. I liked him more than any man I'd ever met. And his name was Agnar Mykle. Now, perhaps most of you are too young to have heard of Agnar Mykle, but he was my uncle, and he started the sex revolution in Norway. Now, of course, it was going to happen anyway. In the same way that Hugh Hefner started the sex revolution in the United States, and I started the computer revolution in the United States, we wrote about it. We said it was going to happen, but it would have happened anyway. But Agnar was very enthusiastic, and he was the bad boy of of Norwegian literature because he wrote a lot of things that were too personal about real people. But I thought his enthusiasm was absolutely fabulous. And he showed me all his puppets. He was at that time giving puppeteering lessons. On another trip to Norway, somewhat later, I met Kristen Nygaard. Now, perhaps you know him as the inventor of object-oriented programming. But perhaps you all also know him because what he told me is, I kept Norway out of the EU. I saw what was happening with the oil prices, and if oil prices go up, the EU goes down, Norway goes up. Why do we want to get in that bed? So that was what he did. So these are all, to me, very interesting aspects. But then Nygaard said to me, by the way, I also took Agnar's puppeteering course. And he was delightful. But Jana, his wife, Jana Holm, she was the smart one. So these are my miscellaneous Norwegian memories. But now let's talk about another Norwegian American of great significance, Douglas Engelbart, Douglas Carl Engelbart. So, of course, you know Engelbart means angel's beard. Well, they don't know that in the States, but here he is as an angel. A couple of years before he died, my wife took this picture with a halo and wings, which just happened to be accidentally from this video frame, but she spotted that angelic aspect. So here he was in 1968. Now, pretty much everybody in this room will know that Doug Engelbart not only invented multiple windows on the screen, teleconferencing, outline processing, and hypertext. I was the guy who named it, but in fact, I thought I invented it, but Doug was ahead of me. And but he was one of the great men of the 20th century. And if you might be interested in my eulogy for him on YouTube, because everyone gathered at the Computer History Center to say what a great man he was and how they always supported him. And I had to get up and say, excuse me, but the people here stabbed him in the back. They took away his money. They took away his grants. He was dropped by Stanford Research Institute. He was dropped by DARPA. And he was snubbed by Xerox PARC. And he spent the remaining almost 40 years of his life unable to produce any of his great work. So nobody else was admitting to that. Okay, so Doug told me that he came here and he happened into a party for Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson that was in the park. And he said, I understand I'm some kind of relative of Bjørnson. And they said, yes, of course. And he said, why do you say that? He said, because you look just like him. So this is something no one else has heard. Okay, so when I was here in Norway in '78, as a kid I thought I was Norwegian. Then I realized I was American. And then in '78 I realized this about Norwegians. Norwegians laugh a lot. Norwegians have strong opinions. Norwegians always say exactly what they think. And they like to make speeches. So I am Norwegian. So, back to Pop. So, wait a minute. There's the trick. I just found this way of doing pictures as I was setting up. So here was Theodore Holm again. So my grandparents, Theodore and Jean Holm, treated my mother when she was growing up as their child, and treating me when I was growing up as their child, with great, great solicitude, and would support anything we were interested in, with great solicitude. And this is what made her able to progress as an actress, and this is what gave me all my ideas, because I was looking at a lot of fringe stuff. As a boy, my heroes were, well, fringe. Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo looked where others look and saw what others did not see. And I have, from time to time, think I've done the same. Buckminster Fuller, who built the Dymaxion car and the Dymaxion house and the radar domes of the 1960s, was designing new ways of life. And I've tried to design new ways of life. I always believed in a wonderful future when everything would be different, and so I tried to design it from an early age. And then Frank Lloyd Wright, the man I identify with most, who designed with originality and elegance and simplicity. And that is what I've tried to put into my software designs. But I grew up as a media guy. I knew theater, I learned photography, and I learned quite a bit about print media. And so when I was 19, I was actually a media innovator. This is a magazine I printed when I was 19. And I paid only $32 to get it printed, and it was kite-shaped, and you had to rotate it as you turned the pages. I showed the mock-up to the printer, my friend, and he said, oh, great, great, great. But when we actually printed it and he saw what we'd done, he was astounded. So I had done it all by myself and not realized. I thought I'd done it with his approval. But so this is one way of handling. I didn't bring Computer Lib, my book of 1974, which has two sides, and which ostensibly started the computer revolution. It was the handbook of the. I only found out recently that the Homebrew Computer Club considered it their Bible, and Wozniak said last year that the Apple I was inspired by my book Computer Lib. So I'm very pleased to have been the gatekeeper to what would have happened anyway. But in any case, that was what I could do with print media. So I thought I was going to be a movie maker. Here was my senior year in college. I shot a film. You can find it on YouTube. It's called The Epiphany of Slocum Furlough, and I'm very proud of it. It's a comedy, but it's a slow-moving comedy about the meaning of life, and most Americans can't relate to it. It's very French, people say. It's melancholy. So melancholy comedies that are badly synced are very hard to get people to like, but yeah, I'm very proud of it still. So I was a media guy. And then I took a computer course in graduate school. And I didn't see a computer. I didn't see one, but I saw brochures. I saw pictures. You could put screens on them. Screens, I can do that. I'm a movie maker. So what is the computer? It's another kind of sprocket. It's another kind of projector. So that just as a filmmaker has to learn cameras and lighting and setups and a great many different technicalities, so it's another kind of camera. So I learned about computers, and but I never actually saw one for years. And in programming, I'm ashamed to say I never got further than basic, simply because there's so many aspects to my designs. I've had to work through other people, and this is very difficult. I'm a producer-director of software, like Doug Engelbart and like Steve Jobs. It means I have to work through other people, which is very difficult because everybody wants to make little changes and they don't understand how those changes will affect the overall design. So we'll talk about this. I believe I was the first person to imagine interactive screens for the general public, and to see that the interactive screen would be the new home of the human race. This was 1960. And so I began to design what I thought were the documents of the future for the interactive screen. Yes, with jump links, what are now called hyperlinks, but also with visible transclusion. And that's, to me, the important thing. And so what I set forth to do in 1960, I said, okay, I'm going to start there's going to be a personal computer industry, and I'll start it. And then there'll be worldwide hypertext, and I'll start that. So basically, the guys who actually did these things, Steve Jobs and Tim Berners-Lee, were 5 years old at the time. And they got better leverage. I never got the leverage. But here's how I think. See, other people think of imitating the past. How do you represent time on a screen? Little clocks, little calendars. Excuse me. Time is very long. It is a line. And it has many cyclicalities. The clock shows the cyclicality of 12 hours. The calendar shows the cyclicality of the month, the week, and the year. Hello? What about the moon? What about phases of the moon? What about all the other phases? What about ice ages? Let's have one representation for time, and I propose the spiral, which interactively you enlarge and you shrink. You take it down to the nanosecond if you want to deal with visualizing concurrent events in a computer. You take it up to millions of years if you want to visualize evolution. We prototyped this in Yarg. What was that 3D thing that ran in the browser? But anyway, it's tricky. So that's how I think. We want to find the greatest generality. We want to find simple generality that will cover all the cases, not particular special cases. Special cases are very bad. So, how represent documents? Well, how did the term WYSIWYG come about? It was coined, well, the phrase was, what you see is what you get. And that came from a transvestite comedian named Flip Wilson, a black comedian who would dress up as Geraldine and say, what you see is what you get. And then John Siebold saw Geraldine on television and said, that's the phrase I want, because he was working on typesetting for the screen at Xerox PARC. So he took the phrase, what you see is what you get, back to Xerox PARC. What did it mean then? It meant that the typesetting commands would not be visible. What you would see on the screen would be what you got when you printed it out. So the term WYSIWYG, now you talk about a WYSIWYG editor, a WYSIWYG document. What does it mean? It means what you see on the screen is what you get when you print it out. Therefore, embracing the assumption that everything is going to be printed out, therefore locking everything to paper. WYSIWYG is propaganda for the notion that paper is the ultimate visualization, which I consider asinine. So how do you represent documents? Well, I propose parallel documents with visible connections. Like this. Like that. Like that. I want only to write parallel documents with this. So what to call this, how to explain it, I've always explained it wrong. When I talked about hypertext, I talked too much about jump links, and the result was the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee said in his proposal in 1989, no one has yet seen Ted Nelson's Docuverse. So what he did was he went and created a different Docuverse. Now, his Docuverse was a unifying address space that would reconcile all the different addresses of the different operating systems, so that at that time there were different Unisys, you had Windows, you had Macintosh, and all of these people had servers on the internet. So the question was how to make a common addressing structure for the hypertext system he wanted to create. So he very sensibly, I think this is his greatest contribution, he created this awful but necessary addressing scheme where a space is represented by %20, because somehow that was the way to do it and make all these damn things line up together. So his Docuverse, Tim's Docuverse, was taking the concept of hierarchical files and directories and mapping the hierarchical files and directories of the servers onto a common address space now called the URL. So the URL Docuverse was created by Tim Berners-Lee. My team in 1979, 10 years earlier, created another one, and because of various political screw-ups, I mean, other people think of the World Wide Web as coming from some great inspiration. I think of it as resulting from several mistakes I made. Okay, so in 1979, my team came up with an addressing space which assigned every character that will ever be typed and every video frame that will ever be shot to a unique address, and arranged for spans of these addresses to be represented mathematically and for permutations, i.e. rearrangements of these contents, to be mathematically expressed within a simple arithmetical, well, relatively simple arithmetical structure based on transfinite arithmetic. So all of this is in my book, Literary Machines, except for the one thing that got left out because it was secret at the time, and that was that we used the permutation matrices in this space. You can look it up, by the way, in Wikipedia, called tumblers. So the permutation matrices in tumbler space would give you permutations, would give you rearrangements of the content. And so a version would be a list of contents in tumbler space. That was the Docuverse my team created. And I don't take credit for thinking of it, I take credit for leading them. And that was Mark Miller, Stuart Green, Roland Hill, Eric Hill, Roland King, and especially Roger Gregory. So, in any case, we are going to put a server up with tumbler space. It's taken us so long after our various political crashes, so people can experiment with that. All right, so now parallelism, parallel documents. You see, I don't want to write anything except parallel documents with visible connections, visible bridges. So I'm tentatively calling these now Xana bridges, because they both show the connections of content and you may traverse them so that you can go from one page or one document and the content there to the corresponding or identical content in the other page. So that is the Xanadu model of documents, entirely different from the web. Now, we do have a demo. And by the way, you can't do it with embedded markup. So embedded markup, no. So our world is different. We send for the original content and then overlay and connect it with links. And our links are freestanding first-class objects which are independently addressable and reusable. Now, we're not the only people who did that. I won't get into other people who've done that. But that is the Xanadu model. So you're bringing up source content in its original, unpolluted form, unsullied by embedded markup. So it's clean, original content with no embedded markup. And then you do what you need to see it or connect it. And that assembly is done in the client. Okay, so you can compare it to Bitcoin, by the way. The Bitcoin wallet computes your present ownings from the beginning of time. So in the same way, we're looking at taking the clean content and connecting and revising it, presenting it in different ways. So let's see now how this actually looks in a demo. So we go now to, if this works, I'm hoping, yeah. All right. So here is our beautiful demo that was supposed to be a cross-platform application, but the programmer bogged down, and it became a locked Windows demo, and we've been trying to get it unlocked for some years now. Okay, so here we see, this is called I coined the word transclusion to mean the same content in two places, one taken from the other. But other people have now used it. If you look it up in Wikipedia, Wikipedia is based on transclusion, but you can't see it side by side. So transclusion is visible by side, I'm probably going to call it something like Zanclusion now. But that's what we have here. So here we have, it is not a link, it's a different mechanism. Here we have, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and that is from the King James Bible. And we can step down and see Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight, and that is from the alphabet of Ben Sira. So as we step through in this demo, we can actually see the respective sources and connected content in their separate pages swarfing up into position next to the one we're supposedly reading. So that is a Xanadu. That is not WYSIWYG. You can't print it. I mean, you can do something with the printer, but hey. Okay, so can this be done in HTML? Well, we did this last year in HTML using cascading style. No, Canvas and style sheets, something else. And I don't want to do this ever again. But here is the very same document. Only the transclusions are showing. Adding the links would make it so cluttered. And so here we have this particular quote. In the beginning, God, and I've centered it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And now I'll jump over to its source. By the way, this column, the entire King James Bible is in that column. So we step over, and now here we are. And you can see from the bridge where in each of the two pages, respectively, those contents come from. So you can get to this at Xanadu.com. But I think it's so awful that essentially, I thank Nicholas Levin from the bottom of my heart for getting it finished. He did a beautiful job considering that it was HTML, JavaScript, and all that, and the document object model with which I never wish to be associated again. So that is, but you can play with it, and there it is. So what more to say? There have been a lot of delays. There have been illness in the family this year, so I got no work done, and I hope to have the full specs out for anybody to implement real soon now. I was hoping it would be a long time ago. It's essentially just dotting the I's on the two different docuverses we need to service now. We want to service the original docuverse of 1979, which we're now calling Xanadu Green. And we're going to service the, the URL docuverse with what is called Xanadu Purple. Both of them selecting portions of original content and bringing them in. Now, of course, remember, in order to do this, you have to have sources of clean, stabilized sources of clean content. You do not revise the content. You revise the Xanadocs which build on the content, and thus retaining the cleanliness of the system, but of course, the political and social issues of maintaining clean content as a stabilized and guaranteed source is always difficult. I like clean principles. The park windows, the original park windows, by the way, would have allowed visible connections between the contents of one window and another, as implemented in the original, Alan Kay's original Smalltalk, for example. However, as imitated by Steve Jobs on the Macintosh, and as the Macintosh was imitated by Bill Gates in Windows, they entirely ruled out this possibility. So that, well, we did another one. This is a kind of amusing. Let's see, can I get there? May not be able to get there. Yes. Yes, here we are. So this was done by Ian Heath in Windows in 2003. So this is called Cosmic Book. And once again, you have connection between the contents of Windows. Well, how could, given that Windows does not allow, the windowing system of Windows does not allow such connections, and Heath's little windows here can be overlaid on an entire Windows desktop. How is it done? Answer. He seizes the entire screen and writes it at run level 3 or whatever in order to fake the connections between the windows. But there's no common method available amongst the windowing systems of the different operating systems. So what we have now, we've moved from a principled world where, for example, in the 60s, people were trying to design ideal computers. The Burroughs 5000, I think it was, is lauded by people like Alan Kay as the greatest computer ever designed. And the virtual machines of things like Simula or Algol had their elegance. And we have sunk from that to JavaScript as the lingua franca that is now that has now become the necessary computer, and the world of apps, where we've sunk even lower, because every app has its own damn rules that you've got to find by fiddling around and looking for little faint things and looking for little faint buttons, rather than any principled method that anyone can learn and carry to the next app. A world of unprincipled apps for today's digital rabble. We have lousy visualizations of almost anything. How do you visualize parallel timelines, for God's sake? How do you visualize the complicated things we have to really visualize? Money! The visualization of money is... I think I'd better stop. But I think you understand where I'm coming from and where I still want to get to. Thank you very much. Sure. Larry Lessig has stopped replying to me because he doesn't understand my system. I believe I was one of the first people to concern myself with the issue of copyright. I heard people talking in 1964 and saying, oh, copyright will go away. And since I'd already dealt with the Copyright Office when I was copywriting Nothing magazine, and my parents lived by copyright. You can't have show business without copyright. I knew it wasn't going to go away. But what's the solution? Well, you see, in today's digital copyright paradigm, let's say you are publisher B that wishes to include something from publisher A in your document, which you're redistributing. So now, well, this is how it worked in the old days of paper. Publisher B would contact publisher A and get permission and pay for a certain number of copies to be distributed or something like that. And publisher B would usually cheat. In one case, I had the publisher published my book and didn't pay me because the company conveniently went bankrupt. I think he did this several times. So that is their system. In the system I've just told you about, where we start from clean content and build up on it, the owner of that clean content can have a sales silo. And who is paying? Each downloader. So let's say you want to make a movie you want to compile a movie about Julius Caesar from various historical movies that have been made about Julius Caesar. And one is being sold by United Artists for 1 cent a frame. one is being sold by some other 21st Century Fox for 1/5 of a cent a frame, and others are free from the Internet Archive. So you make an edit decision list, as it's called in Hollywood, which is what the Xanadu concept is based on. You make a list of the content to be assembled, and you distribute that list to the users. The user then obtains the content from each source. I mean, we won't talk about optimization here, because obviously there are a number of issues. With micropayment, by the way, a term I coined long ago, and other people use it for big payments, I consider it to be really for micro. The proposed denomination would be the nanobuck, so that you denominate the sale of your character or one character of your document or one frame of your video in nanobucks. Get it really down small. Okay, so the end user purchases or obtains each original portion from the originator. They are therefore paid. Now, what is the copyright doctrine? The copyright doctrine we call trans-copyright, because you are taking the original content and bringing it into a new area, a new document. Where the other name of Xanadu, by the way, is transliterature or translit. So trans-copyright means if you give trans-copyright permission on your source material, you are saying, I, as the owner of this source material, permit anyone to reuse it, provided that each downloader gets it from the sources I designate, and provided that a bridge to the original context is always available. See, no one else has that. Now, this takes care of a number of things. One is the payment. Now, payment is not necessarily implied, but if it's the server designated by the rights holder, then the payment is necessary. Now, why is such a thing required? Because you may be putting it in a new context, and the moral rights of the copyright holder, which is especially respected in Europe, the moral right of the copyright holder is that the original should not be sullied, that you should not put this in a context he doesn't like. Well, he can't control that context, but the next best thing is the promise of a bridge to the original context. So between the promise of the bridge and the possibility of payment, we have a complete system and a legal, reasonable copyright permission doctrine. We have a reasonable system. Now, I don't know that it can ever catch on. It may be what can save the academic presses who are desperate. And they're trying to make you subscribe for $1,000 a year or $100 a year or buy an article for $10. That doesn't make sense. It has to be smaller, it has to be reasonable, it has to be seamless, and it has to be well-oiled. So, that's the copyright proposal. Yes?
Do you believe that maybe distributed version control systems provide an answer to your clean content?
Maybe. I am I only last week began to understand how Git worked. So, and you understand, I don't have much time to look at what the rest of the world is doing, because there are so many. The octopus I am wrestling with is very big, and people say, "Well, I have an idea that's like yours." Hello, every idea in the world is like some idea I've had, just as it is for you. So, many people are doing noble things, and I don't know what they are. Wow. You all accept it. It's wonderful. Yes?
So I guess the big concern is if the only way I can get composed content is whilst all of the original pieces of content are still around, what happens when one of those original pieces of content is no longer visible or available on the web? Every other product that transcluded it no longer is whole.
Yes, I mentioned this as a fundamental problem. It's an optimization issue, it is a political issue, it is an economic issue, it's all of those things. And so providing perhaps insurance methods, perhaps backups, a corporation or many corporations to make these promises are among the approaches that would be taken. And again, once we get to optimization, there's no reason the pieces can't be packaged and then assembled by the user. But the point is to keep them clean. Yeah.
What would you do about unwanted links? I mean, someone trying to link to you so that you link to them because you have bi-directional. It's a kind of problem we have today. Is there any difference?
A Xanadu link is a table. Anyone can publish any table. But who will look at it? I mean, I don't see it as a problem, or rather, it's hopeless. Those are the two. Those could be looked at as two answers. The issue is not whether someone links to you, but whether harm is done, in which case it's a legal issue, or whether who looks at it. Yeah, and that's very much a publicity and an issue of the publishing world and of what is trending at a given time. Yeah.
One of the key things we need to be able to do is to be able to reference portions of original content.
Precisely.
Whose responsibility do you see that? Is that a responsibility of the link being able to know all the different types that are out there and have an addressing mechanism, or is it the responsibility of when I come up with a new document format, I am responsible providing a way of addressing my document?
Rather than try to parse exactly what you said and understand it, let me blunder into an answer and see if it fits. The address in the link is the address in the original content. And so what links are contained in a Xanadu, since you may use links by other authors, and of course, and they are identifiable as to their origin, so you can follow a link and see what it was originally in, although now you're using it in a new context. The preserving the original identity of the content is fundamental, and I guess that's my blundering first reply. Do you want to sharpen your question?
In a URL, there's the fragment identifier. The syntax of fragment identifier is not defined in the URI specification. It's defined in the media type specification. So I was trying to understand whether your link concept, your bridge, had a definition for the fragment identifier built in.
There are no fragment identifiers. It's from this particular image frame to that particular interframe. There are no fragments. There's the original content and there's xanolinks. And the xanolink defines a fragment.
Okay.
But nothing in the content. Now, standards are being made all the time that I don't pay attention to. I can't. Because they're not where I'm going. And so many things may work out and fit together, and I have no idea. Gee, I could talk about other things. For example, because why are spreadsheets rectangular? Why are tables rectangular? So you can print them out on paper. Because information isn't rectangular. Consider the periodic table. The different lines of the periodic table are of different lengths. And it's called a table because they print it with big gaps in order to print it on paper. But those relationships, those connections, are pyramidal, you could say, or something else. So I have another generalized invention, which is the, let's see, well, I'll just do this and see if it's there. I'll do this, get rid of this, get rid of this, and look at that. Right. So this is my answer to spreadsheet and tables and database. It is a visible database with a spreadsheet-like interface. So these are cells. And what you're seeing is a rectangular table in two different visualizations. You're looking at the same table. But we've deconstructed it down to the individual cell as the fundamental unit, and any cell can be connected in as many dimensions as you like. These are not Cartesian dimensions. These are listing dimensions. We're talking about intersecting lists. So you may view an ordinary table as intersecting lists, horizontal lists, intersecting with vertical lists, but they're required by the convention to be rectangular, whereas in an acrostic, which is letters that cross each other, making sentences and phrases, or in the game of Scrabble, the actual structure is not rectangular. So here, we're looking. We can actually make structures that break the rectangularity, and do all sorts of things. Now here then is the same thing applied to an interesting data set: the royal families of Europe. Here's Harald, King of Norway. Here's Håkon, King of Norway, and so the kings of Norway are connected. And the kings of Great Britain are connected that way. If we take this to Elizabeth II, reigning monarch of Blighty. Oops, what I meant was. Now we're going to pivot this in another dimension. In the left-hand view, we'll pivot it to dimension date, and we see where she was born. In the right-hand view, we pivot it to dimension date, and then to dimension marriage, we see who she's married to. Now we pivot vertically in the y-axis to dimension children, and there they are. So these cells in this multidimensional structure were lurking off in this peculiar space. It is not a space in the fact it has no coordinates. It's only generated by the connections of the elements within. You can look at all of this. You can find all this, by the way, and download it at xanadu.com/zigzag. It's very daunting for people, partly because I explained it too fast, but partly because it offends people's notion of dimensionality. Because there are the listing dimensions. You can create a new list anytime you like, and that defines a new dimension, which you may review at right angles to the other lists. So it is hyperthogonal in the sense that it's orthogonal in more than 3 dimensions. So for the grand finale, we will go to the vanishing view, and what do you know? The data structure actually created a family tree. We didn't write a family tree program. We just put it into the ZZ structure, and son of a gun, it's a family tree. I discovered this while I was waiting in a doctor's office in Tokyo one day. And so there are still many aspects of this structure to be discovered, but it's a fundamental structure. And as I've said, I'm a minimalist. I want everything to be as simple as possible. As Einstein supposedly said, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So getting things down to the simplest structures rather than... See, what appalls me is putting rectangular spreadsheet chunks into WYSIWYG documents, neither of which makes sense once we let go of the side of the pool. And to be able to let the data flow into its preordained structure and represent the cellular data as structures however they may connect, that is the ideal. I spoke earlier of spiral time, of visualizing time as a spiral. One of the plans, if we ever get a distributable, I'm desperately trying to get a distributable out on this. When I got the patent, the developer in Finland, who was very brilliant, simply threw down his tools and refused to talk to me. And we couldn't discuss what the possible uses of the patent that would be compatible with open source. So, in any case, getting a distributable of this so that people can actually get it in their hands. Because it really seems so stupid to me that something like Quicken, which has become standard, all it keeps track of is money and transactions. How difficult is that? You want to be able to keep track of people, places, events, time, all in one unified conglomerate. So the design around this, called Life Dimensions, will allow you to keep track of the money you borrowed from the friend of the groom at a wedding at a certain place at a certain time. All of those facts being represented appropriately, and each within a context of the times and the friends that you want to keep track of. So, and the spiral time generator would also be built of these cells. So, that's where I'm trying to go with that. I think I've offended your sense of space and time enough.
You have time for one more question?
Okay.
Have you worked on the notion of query language for this type of data structure? Because for tables we have relational SQL queries that work over tabular structures.
Yeah.
What's the equivalent in this space?
First, let's talk about the history of relational database. It was created by Ted Codd at IBM, who supposedly had 500 PhDs working for some time. Then he was given a deadline, and he said, "Oh, the hell with it," and quit in a huff. And the SQL query language was then created by somebody else, entirely contrary to Codd's principles. This is gossip. I don't know if it's true. But in any case, that's like the way JavaScript was created by a guy who was doing his best, but he only had 2 weeks, you know. So, no, I haven't thought about it. I'm a data structure guy. Data structure and visualization. If you want a control keyboard query language, hey, fine. No objection. The point, keeping the data clean is my greater concern. Yes, in the front. Oh, okay. Well, I don't see anybody getting up. You tell me when I have to stop. So combining these two, trying to keep ZigZag and Xanadu separate so that you don't have to buy into either one in order to enjoy the other has been tricky. But I would like to have documents that do have cellular data embedded by this method, and real electronic documents with visible connections, and a world in which we can follow the connections rather than just guessing where things came from. Email readers, hey, that's one. The email visualization everybody's used to was designed by my friend Larry Roberts around 1973 and hasn't been changed. All they've done is with these huge send mail and get mail programs and very POP and IMAP and so on, they've just supported the transport. But the poor user, now we're stuck with the Gmail interface. They make one thing a single click that's easier and get in the way of doing everything I want to do that could have been done with a better client. You want to be able to visualize these things en masse. You want to see, give me an overall picture of everything I've sent to this guy. Give me not just columns, not just rows. And you want to see where those quotations have come to. You know, the little pointy deal that says this is a quotation from somewhere else. How do you get to it? Where do you see it? Where is the Xanadu bridge? So being able to, so how do you put this into the Xanalogical structure? Answer, you make a grand text file with for example, with an mbox format, and use that as your transclusion structure for showing you the original context of every quote that's in the email. And people have so many troubles with this, but to the technical guys, it looks easy because they see the technical part and don't see the user's struggles. My favorite example is the interface that says, no, you must, and this conference had such an interface for the speakers. No, you must put in the date, the year, and then a hyphen, and then the month, and then a hyphen, and then the date. No, format's wrong. They didn't exactly tell you. You just have to guess what the right format is until you get it right. Excuse me. How long would it take the programmer to put in a single regular expression which would parse any date format which the user typed in and put it into the format he likes for the database? Half an hour? So why do we have such horrible interfaces? I think it's very often passive aggressiveness on the part of the programmer who would like to see the user suffer. And furthermore, okay, well, I use the word technoid. I want to distinguish between techie and technoid. Some of my best friends are techies. The technoid is the person who doesn't understand human thought, who is technical but doesn't understand human thought and human life. And in order to design for the user, you have to think about human thought and human life. I consider software to be a branch of movie making, as I suggested earlier. Why? Well, what is a movie? It's events on the screen that affect the heart and mind of the viewer. And what is software today? Events on the screen that affect the heart and mind of the viewer and interact and have consequences. So, it's a branch of movie making, and the technicalities are secondary in importance to the effect on the user's life and thought. And so understanding the user, unfortunately, it devolves into this business of white space and fonts and hiding things. The Steve Jobs aesthetic, I admire Steve Jobs in many ways, but his aesthetic was to hide things and make them small and hard to find. He did some things by simple principles and some things that are small and hard to find. And I think that's all wrong. To me, the greatest interface I ever dealt with was a fire extinguisher. Suddenly, the frying pan contents caught fire. I'm looking at a fire 2 feet in front of me. And there's a fire extinguisher. Let's see, how does that work? I've never studied the matter. It has a handle. It has a pin. The pin is in the way of pushing the handle. Okay, I pull out the pin. I push the handle, and it worked. That's a great interface. That's how interfaces should be. Access structure. How many steps does it take to get to a thing? If a thing is in your hand ready for use, if it's in use, it's zero order access. If you have to pick it up, it's first order access. If something's on top of it, you have to move away, it's second order access. And so consider the access map of what you're working on. And people are shortening the access to paths by one step, which is trivial, where they should be looking at the overall system of orienting the user, making things clear, making things easy to use, and making things vivid. So I very much object to, for example, hard to find start buttons. I bought an old Macintosh recently. I couldn't start it. I took it into the Apple store. Oh, This is the start button, not the one you've been using that's on the MacBook Air. No. And then the other issue of making the start button and the stop button the same thing. No, 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 no. First of all, you don't use the start button very often. And secondly, you do not want to hit the stop button by accident. So making them separate is very important. There are many apparent symmetries which should not be exploited because one may lead to a path the user definitely doesn't want to take, and the other may be trivial. I think I just better stop you. I hear the other people leaving. Thank you very much.